There are people you don't talk to anymore, don't see anymore, maybe don't even think about every day, yet somehow they still live inside you. You can be moving forward, doing everything right, building a new routine, and then suddenly a memory surfaces without warning. A voice, a moment, a feeling. And for a brief second, you're back there. It makes you question yourself. Why this person? Why now? Why does letting go feel harder than holding on? The truth is, some connections don't fade with distance or time because they were never just about the person. They were about what they awakened in you, what they changed, what they revealed. This isn't about weakness or obsession. It's about depth. It's about the quiet bonds that form beneath words and logic, the kind that don't disappear just because life moves on. Some connections leave behind more than memories. They leave emotional imprints that time alone cannot erase. You may forget dates, conversations, even the exact reasons things ended, but the feeling remains. That feeling is not random. It exists because certain people intersect with us during moments when we are emotionally open, vulnerable, or becoming someone new. When a connection forms during those moments, it embeds itself deeply into the nervous system, not just the mind. This is why you can move on logically while still feeling emotionally tied. The bond was never just about shared experiences. It was about how your inner world responded to their presence. Emotional imprints are formed when someone becomes associated with safety, understanding, excitement, or even pain during a formative emotional period. The brain does not store emotional experiences the way it stores facts. Emotional memory is layered, sensory, and tied to survival. When someone repeatedly made you feel seen, valued, or emotionally stimulated, your brain linked their presence to regulation and comfort. Even if the relationship later became unhealthy or ended painfully, the original imprint does not automatically dissolve. The nervous system remembers what once felt stabilizing or meaningful, and it resists letting go of anything that once served an emotional purpose. This is why certain people remain significant long after they are gone. The imprint remains active, resurfacing through triggers like music, places, or even emotional states that resemble how you once felt with them. Emotional imprints are strengthened by intensity rather than duration. A short but emotionally charged connection can leave a deeper mark than a long, steady one. When emotions are heightened through longing, uncertainty, passion, or inconsistency, the brain releases chemicals that reinforce attachment. Dopamine fuels anticipation, oxytocin strengthens bonding, and cortisol heightens emotional memory under stress. Together, they create a powerful internal association. This is why people often struggle to let go of relationships that were complicated or unfinished. The emotional intensity locked the memory in place, making it harder to release even when the relationship no longer exists in reality. Another reason emotional imprints persist is because they shape identity. Certain people enter your life at moments when you are discovering parts of yourself, your capacity to love, your emotional depth, your resilience. The connection becomes linked not only to them, but to who you became while loving them. Letting go then feels like erasing a chapter of yourself, not just releasing a person. The mind resists this because identity is built through emotional experiences. When someone played a role in shaping your emotional landscape, their imprint becomes woven into your sense of self. Pain can deepen emotional imprints as much as love. Hurt, betrayal, or loss activates the brain's threat response, making memories sharper and more persistent. When a relationship ends abruptly or painfully, the nervous system stays alert, searching for resolution. This keeps the emotional imprint alive. You may replay moments not because you want to suffer, but because your brain is trying to make sense of the emotional disruption. Unresolved pain keeps attachment active, reinforcing the feeling that something is unfinished, even when the relationship itself has ended. Time alone does not remove emotional imprints, understanding does. Suppressing feelings or forcing yourself to move on often strengthens the bond because the emotions remain unprocessed. Emotional imprints soften when they are acknowledged, felt, and integrated. This means allowing yourself to recognize why the connection mattered, what it represented, and what it taught you about your emotional needs. When the meaning is understood, the imprint loses its grip. It does not disappear, but it no longer controls you. Letting go does not mean forgetting or minimizing what you felt. It means recognizing that the imprint served a purpose in your life, even if that purpose has passed. Certain people remain within us not because they are meant to return, but because they once helped shape who we are. When you understand that, the attachment shifts from longing to acceptance, and the emotional imprint becomes a quiet part of your history rather than a weight you continue to carry. Unfinished emotional conversations are one of the strongest reasons certain people remain lodged in the mind long after they are gone. The human brain is not designed to tolerate open emotional loops. When something meaningful ends without clarity, resolution, or expression, the mind keeps returning to it, not out of weakness, but out of a deep need to complete what feels incomplete. These are the words you never said, the truths you swallowed, the questions you never asked, and the explanations you never received. When emotions are left unspoken, they do not disappear. They stay active, circulating beneath awareness, waiting for acknowledgement. In many connections, especially intense ones, communication breaks down not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it feels too risky. Fear of rejection, conflict, abandonment, or vulnerability often silences honesty. You may have chosen peace over truth, believing that holding things in would protect the relationship or yourself. At the time, it felt like survival. But emotions that are not expressed do not resolve internally. They remain stored in the body and mind, resurfacing as intrusive thoughts, imagined conversations, or emotional waves that appear without warning. This is why you may find yourself replaying moments, mentally rewriting conversations, or imagining what you would say if you had another chance. The mind returns to unfinished emotional conversations because it is searching for meaning. When something ends abruptly or without explanation, the brain struggles to make sense of it. It asks why, what if, and how things could have been different. These questions are not just intellectual, they are emotional attempts to restore coherence. Closure is not about another person giving you answers. It is about your mind being able to integrate the experience into your emotional narrative. Without that integration, the connection remains active, pulling your attention backward instead of allowing it to move forward. Unfinished conversations are especially powerful when there was emotional imbalance. If you gave more than you received, loved more deeply, or understood more fully, the lack of acknowledgement can feel like an unresolved injustice. You may not be longing for the person as much as you are longing to be understood, validated, or seen. When that need goes unmet, the mind clings to the connection, hoping for a moment where everything finally makes sense. This is why even unhealthy or painful relationships can be difficult to release. The attachment is not to the pain, but to the resolution that never came. Another reason unfinished emotional conversations linger is because they represent suppressed identity. In many relationships, people minimize their needs, silence their boundaries, or reshape themselves to maintain connection. Over time, parts of the self become hidden. When the relationship ends, those unexpressed parts remain unresolved. Letting go then feels like abandoning your own voice. The mind keeps the person present because, emotionally, you never fully existed as yourself in the relationship. The attachment is not just to them, but to the version of you that never got to speak freely. The body also plays a role in keeping unfinished emotional conversations alive. Emotional suppression activates stress responses that keep the nervous system on alert. This heightened state reinforces memory recall, making it easier for unresolved emotions to surface. This is why unfinished relationships often return during quiet moments, late at night, or during emotional vulnerability. The mind is less distracted then, allowing unresolved feelings to rise. These moments are not signs of regression. They are signals that something within you still needs acknowledgement. Resolution does not always require direct communication with the other person. Many emotional conversations can be completed internally. This involves allowing yourself to say what was never said, to feel what was never fully felt, and to grieve what never became real. Writing, reflection, or intentional emotional processing can help the mind close loops that external circumstances never allowed to finish. When emotions are acknowledged without judgment, the nervous system begins to relax and the attachment loses its urgency. Letting go becomes possible when the emotional conversation is no longer unfinished. When you give yourself the understanding, validation, and expression you were waiting for from someone else, the connection changes. The person no longer holds your emotional future hostage. They become part of your past, not because they stopped mattering, but because the story finally reached its emotional conclusion. Attachment to certain people is often less about who they were and more about who you became while you were with them. When someone enters your life during a period of emotional growth, vulnerability, or transformation, they become linked to a specific version of yourself. That version may have been softer, more hopeful, more expressive, or more alive than the person you feel like today. Letting go of them then feels like letting go of that version of you, and the mind resists because identity loss feels threatening. You are not just grieving a person, you are grieving a self that existed in their presence. Human beings build identity through relational mirrors. We understand who we are by how we are seen, received, and reflected by others. When someone once looked at you with curiosity, affection, admiration, or understanding, that gaze helped shape how you saw yourself. You may have felt more confident, more valuable, or more emotionally open because of how you were met. When that person leaves, the reflection disappears, and the version of you that existed in that reflection feels unreachable. The attachment persists because the mind associates the person with access to that lost self. This becomes even stronger if the relationship coincided with a time when you were discovering new emotional depths. Perhaps you learned how deeply you could love, how vulnerable you could be, or how much you could give. Those discoveries were real and they mattered. The person became the container for those experiences, even though the capacity came from you. When the relationship ended, it felt as if those qualities left with them, even though they were always yours. The difficulty in letting go stems from the fear that you will never feel that way again or never be that person again. There is also grief attached to unrealized potential. You may have imagined who you would become together, how life would unfold, or how the relationship would shape your future self. That imagined identity becomes emotionally real, even if it never fully materialized. When the relationship ends, you are left mourning not only what was, but what you believed you were becoming. The mind holds on to the person because they represent a future self that now feels lost. This attachment is not irrational, it is a response to interrupted identity formation. Attachment to who you were with them is intensified when you changed yourself to maintain the connection. If you adapted, softened, silenced parts of yourself, or became more accommodating, those changes shaped your behavior and self-perception. When the relationship ends, you may feel fragmented, unsure which parts of you are authentic and which were situational. Letting go of the person then feels destabilizing because they were the context in which that version of you existed. The mind clings to them as an anchor for coherence, even if the relationship itself was no longer healthy. Memory also plays a role in preserving this attachment. The brain selectively recalls moments that reinforce identity-linked emotions. You remember how you laughed, how you felt understood, how you showed up differently. These memories are not just about the other person. They are reminders of a self that felt meaningful. The pain of letting go is often the pain of feeling disconnected from that self in the present. You may believe that without them, you cannot access that emotional state again, even though it was always generated from within you. Healing begins when you recognize that who you were with them was not created by them. They may have unlocked it, encouraged it, or witnessed it, but they did not own it. The qualities you miss are yours to reclaim. Emotional depth, vulnerability, passion, and openness are not exclusive to one connection. They are capacities that can exist again in different forms with different people or even alone. Letting go becomes possible when you stop associating your best self with a specific person and start integrating that self into your present life. You are allowed to honor the version of yourself that existed in that relationship without staying attached to the person who no longer belongs in your life. That version was real, meaningful, and important, but it does not require their presence to continue existing. When you begin to carry those qualities forward independently, the attachment loosens. The person becomes part of your history rather than the gatekeeper of who you once were, and the grief shifts from longing to quiet acknowledgement of growth and change. Hope has a quiet way of disguising itself as memory, and this is one of the most powerful reasons certain people remain difficult to let go of. The mind does not simply recall what happened, it reconstructs it, often softening the edges of pain and amplifying moments of warmth, connection, or possibility. What you return to again and again is rarely the full reality of the relationship. It is the version shaped by longing, by what you wished had happened, by what you believe could still happen. Memory becomes a place where hope hides, convincing you that the past still contains a future. The brain is wired to seek possibility. When something meaningful ends without clear resolution, the mind struggles to accept finality. Instead, it replays memories not as they were, but as they could have been. A look becomes a promise. A moment of closeness becomes evidence. A kind word becomes a sign of deeper feeling. Over time, these reconstructed memories begin to feel more emotionally real than the present. You are not holding on to the person. You are holding on to the possibility that the story was not finished, that something might still change, that meaning has not been lost. This confusion between hope and memory is strengthened when the relationship had moments of inconsistency. When affection was intermittent or clarity was missing, the mind fills in the gaps with imagination. Uncertainty fuels attachment because the brain keeps searching for certainty. It replays the good moments as proof that the connection was real, meaningful, or destined. These memories are not lies, but they are incomplete. They highlight potential while minimizing pain, imbalance, or incompatibility. Hope thrives in that selective recall, quietly convincing you that letting go means abandoning something that might still become what you once believed it could be. There is also emotional comfort in revisiting hopeful memories. Even when the present is stable, hope-filled memories offer a sense of emotional aliveness. They remind you of intensity, closeness, and possibility. Letting go of them feels like stepping into emotional neutrality, which can feel empty by comparison. The mind resists this shift, preferring the emotional charge of hope to the quiet stillness of acceptance. This does not mean you are addicted to suffering. It means you are human, wired to seek meaning, connection, and emotional depth. Hope disguised as memory also protects against grief. Fully accepting that something is over requires mourning not only the person, but the future you imagined. This kind of grief is profound because it involves loss of identity, expectation, and direction. The mind delays this process by clinging to hopeful memories, allowing you to remain emotionally connected without confronting the finality of loss. In this way, hope functions as a temporary shelter, offering emotional continuity when acceptance feels too overwhelming. However, this shelter can become a trap if it prevents emotional movement. When memory becomes a substitute for reality, it keeps you emotionally anchored to a past that no longer exists. You may find yourself comparing present experiences to remembered ones, measuring new connections against an idealized version of the past. This comparison is unfair to both yourself and others because it is rooted in hope, not reality. The more the mind revisits hopeful memories, the more difficult it becomes to engage fully with the present. Letting go requires separating what was real from what was hoped for. This does not mean denying the beauty or significance of the connection. It means acknowledging that possibility alone is not a relationship. Memory can honor what existed without preserving the illusion of what might have been. When you allow yourself to see the full picture, including pain, inconsistency, and unmet needs, hope begins to soften into acceptance. As hope loosens its grip, memory transforms. It becomes a record rather than a refuge. You can remember without reaching, reflect without longing, and honor without waiting. The person remains part of your story, but no longer holds your emotional future. When hope steps out of memory, you create space for new meaning, new connections, and new versions of yourself that are grounded not in what might have been, but in what is possible now. Pain that feels familiar has a strange pull on the human mind, even when that pain is the very thing you wish you could escape. When a connection involves repeated disappointment, inconsistency, or emotional unpredictability, the nervous system adapts to that environment. Over time, the body begins to recognize that pattern as normal. This is not because the pain feels good, but because it is known. Familiar pain provides a sense of predictability, and predictability offers a form of safety, even when the experience itself is harmful. Letting go then feels threatening, not because the relationship was healthy, but because the nervous system has learned how to survive within that discomfort. The brain prioritizes familiarity over comfort. When emotional pain becomes routine, the mind builds expectations around it. You know when to brace, when to hope, and when to recover. That rhythm, as exhausting as it is, becomes structured. When the relationship ends, that structure collapses. The nervous system is left without reference points, and this absence can feel more distressing than the pain itself. This is why people often return to situations that hurt them or struggle to let go long after the harm has ended. The discomfort of the unknown feels more dangerous than the certainty of familiar pain. Familiar pain is often rooted in earlier emotional experiences. Many people are drawn to relationships that mirror unresolved patterns from childhood or past connections. If emotional distance, inconsistency, or conditional affection was part of early attachment, the nervous system learns to associate those dynamics with love. Later in life, similar patterns feel instinctively recognizable. Letting go of someone who fits that pattern can feel like breaking a deeply ingrained emotional script. The attachment is not just to the person, but to a familiar emotional environment that the nervous system knows how to navigate. This familiarity creates emotional conditioning. Intermittent validation or affection strengthens attachment because the brain releases dopamine unpredictably, reinforcing the bond. The contrast between pain and relief intensifies emotional memory. Over time, the mind associates the person with both distress and comfort, creating a powerful internal loop. Even when the pain outweighs the pleasure, the emotional conditioning remains active. Letting go then feels like withdrawal, not because the connection was fulfilling, but because the brain is adjusting to the absence of a pattern it became accustomed to. Familiar pain also offers identity reinforcement. When you spend time in a dynamic where you are constantly adapting, proving, waiting, or hoping, those behaviors become part of how you see yourself. You may identify as the one who understands, forgives, or endures. Letting go of the relationship challenges that identity. Without the familiar pain, you are left to redefine who you are without the role you once played. This identity shift can feel disorienting, making the attachment harder to release. There is also fear beneath familiar pain, fear of emptiness, fear of starting over, fear of not finding connection again. Pain, at least, confirms that something existed, that you mattered enough to feel something. Emptiness feels like nothingness, and the mind resists that void. It clings to familiar pain as proof of connection, even when that connection is no longer healthy or real. This is not weakness. It is the mind trying to protect itself from perceived emotional extinction. Healing begins when the nervous system learns that unfamiliar peace is not danger. This requires patience and compassion toward yourself. Letting go does not mean forcing yourself to feel better or pretending the pain did not matter. It means allowing your body and mind to gradually experience stability without chaos, safety without struggle, and connection without fear. Over time, unfamiliar peace becomes familiar, and the pull of old pain weakens. When you understand that familiar pain is not the same as love, the attachment begins to loosen. You realize that what felt like connection was often survival conditioning and emotional habit. As you create new emotional patterns rooted in consistency, respect, and calm, the old ones lose their grip. The person becomes a chapter you survived rather than a place you need to return to, and the absence of pain becomes space for something healthier to take its place. When a connection is assigned deep meaning, letting go feels less like separation and more like erasing something essential from your identity. Some people do not just enter your life as companions, they become symbols. They come to represent safety when you felt unsure, belonging when you felt alone, or love when you doubted your worth. Over time, the person stops being just a person and starts carrying emotional weight far beyond who they actually are. When this happens, releasing them feels like losing access to those feelings, even if they no longer provide them in reality. The human mind is meaning making by nature. It constantly looks for patterns, significance, and emotional anchors. When someone shows up during a vulnerable or transformative period, the brain links their presence to survival and emotional regulation. You may have felt calmer around them, more grounded, or more understood. Those feelings become associated with the person rather than recognized as internal states you were capable of accessing. Letting go then feels dangerous because it seems like abandoning the source of emotional stability, even though that stability was always something your nervous system created in response to the connection. Meaning intensifies when the connection fills an emotional gap. If you felt unseen, unheard, or disconnected before meeting them, their presence may have felt like relief. The mind labels that relief as rare and irreplaceable. Over time, the person becomes a symbol of rescue, even if the relationship later caused pain. The attachment persists not because the connection was healthy, but because it once met a deep emotional need. Letting go feels like stepping back into the void you were in before them, even if that void no longer truly exists. Identity becomes entangled when meaning is assigned this way. You may begin to define yourself through the relationship, seeing yourself as chosen, loved, or understood because of how they once treated you. When the connection ends, the mind struggles with the question of who you are without that validation. This is why letting go can feel like losing yourself. The attachment is not to the person alone, but to the identity that formed around being important to them. The fear is not just of losing them, but of becoming emotionally undefined. Meaning also grows stronger when the relationship involved sacrifice. When you invested time, emotional energy, patience, or compromise, the mind resists letting go because doing so feels like admitting that the sacrifice was for nothing. The brain seeks justification for pain endured. Holding on to the person preserves the belief that the connection mattered, that the struggle had purpose. Letting go can feel like invalidating your own effort, love, and endurance, even though release does not erase what you gave or who you were during that time. Cultural narratives reinforce this attachment to meaning. Stories often portray deep connection as rare, once in a lifetime, or destined. When you internalize these ideas, you may believe that losing this person means losing your chance at that kind of connection forever. This belief adds pressure to the attachment, making letting go feel reckless or irreversible. The mind clings to the meaning because it fears that without it, life will feel smaller, emptier, or less significant. Over time, meaning can overshadow reality. You may overlook who the person is now, focusing instead on what they once represented. The mind protects the symbol even when the reality no longer aligns. This is why you can miss someone who no longer treats you well or who no longer fits into your life. You are not attached to the present version of them, but to the meaning they carried during a specific emotional chapter of your life. Letting go becomes possible when meaning is reclaimed rather than abandoned. Safety, belonging, love, and understanding do not live inside another person. They are emotional states you can experience again in different ways with different people or even within yourself. When you recognize that the connection was meaningful without being permanent, the grip softens. The person no longer holds your identity hostage. They become part of your story, not the definition of it. The meaning remains, but it is no longer attached to their presence, allowing you to move forward without erasing what once mattered. In the end, not being able to let go of certain people is not a flaw in your strength or a failure of your will. It is evidence that something meaningful once passed through your life and left its imprint. Emotional bonds linger because they were tied to growth, identity, hope, pain, and the parts of you that were learning how to feel deeply. What holds on is not the person themselves, but the unresolved emotions, the familiar patterns, the versions of you that emerged, and the meaning your mind attached to the connection. Letting go is not an act of erasing the past. It is an act of understanding it fully. When you recognize why the attachment exists, the grip begins to loosen. The memories remain, but they soften. The lessons stay, but they stop hurting. You don't lose what mattered. You carry it forward in a healthier form. And when that happens, you realize that release doesn't diminish the connection. It transforms it into wisdom, clarity, and the quiet strength to choose yourself without denying what once felt real.